Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday night's Bible study, where we are still in the book of Hebrews, but I don't know about you, but I feel like we're flying through it. Tonight, we are flying through possibly one of the most famous chapters in the New Testament. This list of people who exemplify what it means to live by faith. And Fiona, who was initially going to be teaching this evening, gave it the title of Heroes of Faith. And as I was looking at commentaries, I saw that was very often the way that this section was described. And although I don't mind that as a description particularly, I think it might be better to say, I don't know, they're hamstrung heroes. If you want to think of heroes, think of hamstrung heroes. Hamstringing is what you do to a horse so that it can't fully run. Because the people that God chooses to reveal himself to are fallen, fragile, faulty people. So we're fallen, fragile, and faulty. And then what is added to this fallen, fragile, faulty person is faith. And seeing these people as fallen, faulty, fragile individuals helps us better to engage with the individuals in the list. Because, well, I don't know about you, but my feeling most mornings when I wake up is I don't feel like a hero of faith with a sword and a shield, and I don't put on my, feel like I march downstairs with my breastplate of righteousness and my helmet of salvation and my sword of truth in my hand. I don't wake up like that every morning. Some of you might, and I hope one day to feel that way, and that's what is promised by the Bible. But in the meantime, what we're promised is not that. I don't know if any of you watch Strictly Come Dancing, but I watch it sometimes. And this year last year I was very impressed by Rose Ayling-Ellis, the deaf girl, and this famous dance that they did where they cut the music. And you saw what it was for her to dance with no music. It was a very striking, emotional moment that I didn't anticipate it touching me in the way that it did, but it was very striking that here was somebody who had what we used to call disability. I don't know what you call it nowadays, but here is somebody who was deaf, couldn't hear. How can you dance to music if you can't hear? We saw her doing it, but then we saw inside what it was like for her to dance as a deaf person, and it was incredible. And the same, in a way, has happened this year. This year, it's a para-Olympian called Ellie Simmons. Ellie Simmons is a dwarf, technically speaking, and I was frightened that it would be really strange. But actually, once again, I've been really touched by how, despite her disabilities, she is really one of the best dancers. I just didn't think, until I'd seen it, I wouldn't have believed it. And until I experienced the Rose Ayling dance, I wouldn't have understood it. And so I use those as two examples of how we are. Even Jacob limped. So it's not our strength that is on display, it's our faith. When you add faith to fallen, fragile, faulty individuals, what you get is a fabulous family. As I look around this screen, what I see is a fabulous family. John Hull doesn't look that much like Salome, thankfully. There's a strong resemblance between the two Simons because they've both got grey-white beards. There are some things about us that are the same. We're all male or female, contrary to popular opinion. And we were all born into that gender, contrary to popular opinion. But we are very diverse. Some of us are very clever, some of us are very rich, some of us very poor, some of us very tall, some of us short. We're so diverse, aren't we? And that's the thing that we missed when we didn't go to church. We didn't see all this diversity, but it's something that we took for granted before. So to turn a slightly strange group of people into a fabulous family, you just add faith. It reminded me of Angel Delight. Do you remember Angel Delight? Just add milk and whisk it. I won't. I was going to play you the advert, but after the disaster of last week, I decided not to. The catch line was, "It's delicious, it's lovely, it's delightful, it's Angel Delight." So God adds faith to fallen, fragile people to create this delicious, lovely, delightful community. And that's really what we're being shown here. In Hebrews 11, we started by saying that faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. That's what the ancients were commended for. And I want to say right from the beginning that this list is all about continuity. It's all about continuity. It's the same God, the same promises, and the same people. So it's not that New Testament Christians are somehow a part of a new plan, because the New Testament was promised in Jeremiah 31 to the Old Testament people of God. It's that we are the diversity of the family sprouted. So like a tree, which is an olive tree is the illustration that Paul uses in Romans. In a sense, before Acts took place and the Spirit came at that festival of Pentecost, the community was quite uniform, like a trunk. And then after that point, it burst into the shape of a tree. But that's no surprise, because there are trees at the beginning and the end of the Bible story anyway. And so a tree is a very natural way of illustrating the growth of the gospel. So it's what the ancients were commended for. And then by faith, we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. Now, I know I talked a little bit about this last time, but what struck me as I was looking at this was just how wise Hebrews is to put creation at the beginning of this list. So it was very helpful for somebody to ask me about the ark that's been built in Kentucky. I went there several years ago. It is huge, and it's been built by a ministry that was founded by a guy called Ken Ham, and it cost millions and millions to build this thing. And what it shows us firstly that the ark could be built, can be built, and would float if it was built. It shows you how you could put all the required animals inside, and how they've even tried to figure out ways you could feed and water them. And you leave that space believing it's perfectly reasonable, this boat thing. Now, in this story of faith, last week we looked at standing with people who were exposed to ridicule and insult. If you tell people that you believe there really was an ark and it really did save humanity and it really was a flood that covered the whole of the world, and that you believe the Bible, you will be ridiculed. It's the most common thing that happens to me on the streets when we're doing, not so much with Jewish evangelism, but more general outreach work. People come up to you, you don't believe those fairy tales, do you, mate? Not always with that accent, but very often. And here in Hebrews, there's a battle going on for what is truth. What is truth? So Hebrews is going to now ask us to look at all these examples of people and see if we trust what they trusted. Do we trust what they trusted? And the first thing that we have to trust is that God made the earth in 6 days, because that's what the Bible says, and that's my authority. And goodness knows that truth has been compromised. Did God really say that he made the earth in 6 days? Yes, he really did say that. Yes, that's really what he said. And never was Hebrews 11:2 more on the nail than to start with that truth. There was a guy called Charles Lyell. I'd never heard of him until today, but he paved the way for Darwin's evolutionary theory by establishing something called the long time frame. Technically, it's called uniformitarianism. The idea that that the past has always been like the present. You have to believe that for radiocarbon dating to work, and because if you don't believe it, it doesn't work. But if you do believe it, it makes the Earth billions of years old, which means that the Earth existed a long time before Adam and Eve existed, and so people can begin to say, well, the Bible's figurative, it's telling a story, it's a myth, it's teaching us something, but it's not reality. And I want to say to you this evening that Hebrews says the exact opposite. It's the exact opposite, that life only makes sense when you take Genesis as real history. Because Genesis, the book, it contains so much. When we think about why do Christians stand against abortion and same-sex marriage and ethics and against LGBTQ beliefs, why do we stand against those things? Because we believe it. God made the universe in order for us to dwell with him. We believe that man's chief aim is to glorify God and live with him forever. Well, we do if we're Anglicans, or at least it's in the catechisms, the Westminster catechisms. So we have to be very careful about what we compromise. And I think as we've read through Hebrews, we've felt how uncompromising it is. I remember Fiona doing a talk a few weeks ago and just thinking, wow, this is a very uncompromising, challenging book, because I'm not sure this is really, this is how close I am to that. And I realized how much I am conditioned by the secular culture in which we lived. In 1700, up until about 200 or 300 years ago, everybody pretty much believed in the authority of Scripture and that there was a God. But this guy, Charles Lyndon, when it Charles Lyell, he gave the atheists a tool. Later in 1850 something, a man called Dr. F. Sherwood Taylor, he's a doctor, so we have to trust him, don't we? Because we trust doctors because they're scientists. Anyway, we won't go there with that. He said, I myself have little doubt that uniformitarianism, long ages geology, and the theory of evolution have changed England from a Christian country to a pagan nation. We live in a pagan nation, and bear in mind that guy was saying that in the late 1800s, 1850. He lived till 1956. So he was saying it a while ago. He recognized that geology and evolution together were the tools that that Satan needed to turn England from a power that was sending missionaries around the world to proclaim the gospel, to one that barely sends missionaries and is actually receiving them from all over the world. And these missionaries, when they come here, they think this is going to be this is one step. It's like Revelation 21, and they're expecting Revelation 21 and 22. And they come and they think, what on earth has happened to this country? Quite amazing. Anyway, so I wanted to start by telling you that this chapter is a battle about truth. What truth will you live by? Will you trust God's truth? Trusting God's truth will produce fruit. It will produce, it's faith that works, if you like. There is often a separation between faith and works, but I want to say that the faith that we see here and that it's talked about in the book of James, which is the next book along in the canon, is faith that goes to work. So let's have a little look at how it goes to work. Verse 4, by faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith he still speaks even though he's dead. So we all know the story of Cain and Abel. It's as famous as the other story of two brothers, Jacob and Esau. But it's a terrifying story that literally it says in Genesis 4, Adam lay with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, with the help of the Lord, I've brought forth a man. And some commentators translate that as with the help of the Lord, I brought forth a man equal to God. So there's a sense that she thought that this kid was going to be the answer. And this continues this idea. Adam and Eve in the garden thought that rebellion against God would make them like God, but it actually ruined everything that they had with God. Now this child is born, and there's the hope of the parents is that the child Cain is going to be the savior that God had promised in the garden before they were expelled. But that isn't the case. And I suppose I don't know about you, but I've thought about it quite a lot about why would he reject why would he reject Cain's offering and not accept it? Why would Abel's gift be seen as better? Because the text doesn't really say. Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. So one was a farmer, one had animals. In the course of time, they brought fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord, but Abel brought fat portions, some of the firstborn of his flock. So they wanted to acknowledge God. They're both doing the right thing, the right religious thing. Outwardly, you would see these two as religious brothers. They're going to God wherever they met with him then, and they're bringing the offerings, acknowledging that all gifts come from God. But and they tie to what they do. Like you would expect a fisherman to bring fish. You'd expect maybe a builder to bring bricks, whatever. It doesn't really matter. There's nothing wrong with what they're doing or what they're bringing. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. I think the key verse is that 2 Samuel verse about do not judge by outward appearance because God looks on the heart. The offerings were fine. The outward appearance of religion was fine. But there was something very wrong in Cain's heart. Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. If you won't accept me, God, on my terms, when I've done all the right things, then my reaction is going to be angry. I'm going to be angry. And I'm going to be miserable. It's interesting that Jude develops this exact idea in the two other places where it's mentioned, but we'll come to that. He's angry. Do you remember how the other angry prophets? Jonah was angry, wasn't he? Jonah and Elijah are the two that come to mind. Both of them bordering on bipolar, I think. Struggled great victories and great defeats, and didn't ever and found it really difficult, as indeed I do. But his reaction was to be very angry and downcast. And then let's learn something, not about Cain, but about our God, about the Lord Jesus, about the nature of our God. Because the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry?" Now, I don't think that you can hear that with a tone, or you can hear it as an inquiring father. What's upset you? Yesterday, my son got angry. He never really gets angry, but he did yesterday, and I asked him why, and it was because he'd got himself wound up about revision for these mock exams he's got when half term ends. And I think it's that sense. God is asking as a father, what made you angry? Why are your face downcast? He says, if you do what's right, will you not be accepted? And that's where the knife went in. That's when the knife went in, because he's saying, if you do what's right, won't you be accepted? And like the rich young man who had done everything right, when it came down to the key issue of his heart, he walked away. And then not only does he appeal to him, sort of express his knowledge of him, but he also warns him. Sin is crouching on your door, but you've got to master it. Well, that's the truth for us, isn't it? Sin is crouching. It was true for Paul in Romans 7 as he struggled with sin. And it's true for us as well. Each of us will have what people call besetting sins. Sins that actually are a bit demoralizing for us in a way, but in another way, they further underline the truth of the gospel, which is an encouragement in a peculiar sort of godlike way. So Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. One would then expect a Sodom and Gomorrah type judgment to fall on the murderer, because God is just and we want justice. But the Lord says to Cain, where's your brother Abel? Almost in a mirror of who told you you were naked. In Genesis 3. I don't know, he says. Am I my brother's keeper? I think it's one of the most famous quotes in the Bible. I don't know, he replied. Like Aaron, do you remember Aaron? When Moses asked Aaron where the golden calf had came from, he said, oh, we threw the gold into the fire and it came out like that. It's our natural instinct to lie when we get caught, and to not recognize that God knows anyway, and that he's not asking for information's sake. He's asking for giving us the opportunity to speak to him honestly about who we are and what we believe. What have you done? He says, listen, your brother's blood cries out from under the ground, and now you're under a curse, and you'll be a restless wanderer, he says in verse 12. And Cain says to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. Today you're driving me from the land and hiding me from your presence. I'll be a restless wanderer, and whoever finds me will kill me. But the Lord says to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, he'll suffer vengeance seven times over. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who found him could kill him. So Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod. Again, look at the character of our God. This is the murder. You know, if Satan is the father of lies and a murderer from the beginning, Cain is the archetypal hate-driven murderer. And when he makes an appeal to the perfect, pure, righteous God, God makes accommodation and sets up what is probably the prototype for the cities of refuge. Because Cain goes and builds a city, and there he's safe. And later, when they go into the promised land, they build cities of refuge where if somebody kills somebody, they can run so that they don't get killed by the avenger. And it gives them a bit of protection and gives them a chance to for everything to be done properly. So by faith, Abel offered a better sacrifice than Cain did. So the first thing we want to be realizing is that our offerings and our physical offerings and the works are no substitute for a broken and contrite heart that's honest before God. Think of the story of the publican and the righteous man. You know, I'm glad I wasn't born like him, a sinner, la la la. And then the publican goes to the temple and says, oh, I can't even go in there. I'm such a disgrace. I'm just going to go home. And Jesus says, it asks, which one? We know the truth, that the one that walked away recognizing his own sin is the one that was precious in God's sight. And yet we easily fall into, if I've done, like Cain is like the older brother in the story of the prodigal son, who said, I've done all these things and you never killed even a little goat for me, let alone put a ring on my finger. And what does the father say? Your brother was dead and now he's alive. How could I not celebrate? Moving on. It doesn't mean, well, before I move on, I wanted to emphasize God's grace and kindness towards Cain, even though Cain was a murderer, because it's a big part of the gospel. Whilst we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Though you were objects of his wrath, he showed you mercy. By faith, in verse 5, Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found before God had taken him away. Before he was taken away, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So now we learn this truth, that faith, that you can't please God without faith. It implies that you can please God, which is great news. Being able to please somebody in a relationship is very important to the way we live. I'm trying to think of a good example of something I've done to please somebody. Taking over this Bible study tonight for Fiona, for example, that would please her. My son finally putting his plates in the dishwasher rather than on the top of the dishwasher, which, anyway, that kind of thing. You know, teenagers, you've all got your examples of those. A lot of the things that we do. Oh, here's one thing. I found this is one example from today. I saw someone on a TV show drinking milk out of a carton. And I thought, oh dear, horrible. And then this afternoon, I rushed downstairs and I needed a drink and I drank out of a carton. Idiot. But isn't that us? I think that's us. I don't know what that's got to do with this. Oh, yes. Without faith, it's impossible to please God, because anyone who's got to, so you can please him by the way that you act. Be encouraged. He delights to see his children be obedient. I can't tell you how much I delighted the other day when I came downstairs and the kitchen was clean. And if I'm evil and I delight over my kids' thing, think how eagerly God wants to delight over your efforts, broken and imperfect though they are. But it does show us what we've got. We've got to believe that he exists. It seems obvious, but we have to believe that God exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. I heard a story yesterday by a man called Stuart Cohen. Some of you might have met him or know him. I know Simon Ellman knows him. Stuart Cohen told me he was talking to his family who are not believers, and he was talking about being in that being a Christian is like being in a worldwide family. And he just said that off the cuff, and then to them, and there was no, he didn't work his way to any kind of through any Roman road or any evangelistic methods. He just said it. And then they went out for coffee in the local area in the town, and they sat down for coffee, and the family people said, "Oh, what do you want? I'll go and get it." So off this, the rest of the family went off and left Stuart and his wife Laurie at the table. And the guy on the next table said to him, "Are you Christians?" I don't know why he asked. They must have said something, I don't know. And Stuart has a thing about him as well, which maybe that he noticed. And they said yes. And then they got into this great conversation about faith. And Stuart was saying, "Oh, it's so funny because before I said about how we're in this great family, and then here you are." And the family came, his unbelieving family came back, and they just acted politely like English people do. And when these people had left, they said, "Oh, how do you know those two? How those two? Where did you meet them? What?" And they said, "Oh no, we never met them before. But it's like I said to you, they're part of the world. I'm part of a worldwide community." And I think that is a good illustration of what the writer's getting at here, that you've got to believe in him and believe that he rewards us as we earnestly seek him. Because to not believe that is like it's like Father Christmas that doesn't give presents. I know Father Christmas isn't real, and everyone's old enough to know that in this group. It's in his nature to give, not in a way like Father Christmas, dependent on whether you're naughty or nice, but because it is in his nature to give. So we have to believe that he exists, that he hears our prayers, and he rewards us as we seek him. That's the motivation that you're going to see developing as we work through some more of this chapter. Because what you get in Hebrews 11 is a couple of examples of people, and then like a principle. So we've had this, we had first the principle about faith being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. And then the fact that by faith we understand that the universe was made at God's command. Now we understand that without faith it's impossible to please God, but that we can therefore please him as we earnestly seek him, and that he will reward us. Just as it's not just Stuart Cohen that he does this with. I'm sure, and maybe afterwards what we can do is tell a few stories about how we've experienced God rewarding us in that kind of a way. Because each one of these stories is stories of someone doing something amazing. So Enoch lived a long time and walked with God, but Enoch has has his own book. It's not in the canon, but it's referred to in 1 John. It's in 1 John or Jude. It's 1 John. It's 1 John 3:12 then. Yeah. So 1 John 3:12 actually is the quote that refers to Cain in the context of love. So Cain becomes a foil. Cain is one who hates and belongs to the evil one and murdered his brother. He did it because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. So don't be surprised if the world hates you. So now we can maybe begin to see why he uses Cain in the context of us being hated and persecuted. So that John, Paul, and the writers of Hebrews all seem to have the same sorts of ideas in their letters, writing to their different congregations. And you can hear the Beatitudes when anyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life in them. Enoch does, in fact, appear in Jude. Jude is good and bad. Well, it's very short, so it's easy. It's easy to memorize, but hard to find. It comes after John, and verse 14 says, Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men. See, the Lord is coming with thousands upon thousands of his holy ones to judge everyone and to convict all the ungodly of their ungodly acts that they have done in the ungodly way, of all the harsh words ungodly sinners have spoken against him. These men are grumblers, fault finders. They follow their own evil desires. They boast about themselves and flatter others for their own advantage. Enoch not only walked with God, but he saw the end. He saw this picture of where the ungodly will end up. And remember, in Hebrews last week, or the week before, we had what a terrifying thing it is to fall into the hands of the living God. And I think whoever was teaching it explained that it's terrifying to fall into the hands of the living God without the salvation that Yeshua brings, without the transformation that the gospel brings, turning a sinner into a saint so that he can be considered righteous in the sight of God. By faith, Noah warned about the things not yet seen. In holy fear, he built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heirs of the righteousness that comes by faith. In Jewish tradition, Noah's like really a very important character because he's sort of like the Gentile Moses. There are 7 Noahide laws that the Gentiles have to follow if they want a place in the world to come. But here, what's being picked out is the idea of a man standing in the middle of a very dry place saying, it's going to rain, and it's going to rain so hard, we're all going to drown unless you come in the boat. And it didn't just go on for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but I think it went on for years. And so he's described as a preacher of righteousness. There's something wonderful in Noah's character that he was simultaneously doing the physical act of building the ark, whilst at the same time preaching righteousness, whilst at the same time not seeing any evidence that what he was saying was true. In a way, the people that I think are like that are the people that believed that Israel would become a state again when it wasn't. You know, Balfour and that all that lot. That how they had the courage to actually believe that it would happen, I do not know. I still find it difficult to believe now, but it did happen. And you can see God's hand. And we were talking, weren't we, earlier about Trump moving the U.S. embassy to to Jerusalem, and we wonder whether or not the government will continue with the plan to move the UK embassy to Jerusalem. I hope they do. So Noah is an example of how holy fear motivated to build something practical to save his family. And when the condemnation came, he was safe, he and his family. Jesus uses him as an example. As you know, people at the end, people will be just living their lives normally, expecting everything to continue. We all think tomorrow morning will be Wednesday, we'll get up and do our various things, but we don't know. And we've got a bit more time, so we can look at Abraham. It says, by faith, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. There's a poem that says, better to walk in the darkness with your hand in God's hand than to walk in the light without him. It's a woman poet, I think Louise something or other. Again, people could put it in the chat if they know, but anyway, it's this idea, the idea that it's better to walk in the darkness with your hand in God's hand than to walk in the light without him. Abraham understood what that meant. He chose to go on a kind of magical, spiritual mystery tour. And he did it because he trusted the one who told him to go. He trusted the one who told him to go. And when he went, even though it says by faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country, he lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs of the same promise, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. Round the corner from where I live, there's a site, a flat earth site, and it says bought by this developer. They're going to build X, Y, and Z on this place. Well, it's been like that for years. Nothing's happening. I'm beginning to lose faith that it's ever going to be built. But Abraham and we are invited to dream about this city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. Abraham dreamt about it, but he didn't have Revelation 21 and 22 to read and to see it described. He didn't even have Ezekiel's third temple to wander about. He lived in a tent because he didn't want to be in a permanent building. He wanted to wait for the permanent building, and he would rather die waiting than rush ahead of God. Awesome. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful who made him the promise. He's just said in verse 10 about how Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob share the same promise. I said at the beginning that it's the same God, the same promise, the same people. We're part of this great set of hamstrung heroes, these kind of broken people where you sprinkle, just add not milk, faith, and we become this delightful community, better than angel delight. And now we're seeing that this God is the God of life, able to give life where life is impossible. So Abraham and Sarah were both as good as dead, but were promised that their children would be as numerous as stars in the sky. Well, you've really got to understand and trust the God, our God, to believe that. And later, we don't have any time left. Later next week, we will look on to see other examples. But this section is finished with the verse 13. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. Like God took Moses up to the top of the mountain and showed him the promised land. Are we people who have climbed up onto God's mountain and looked forward to his promises and trusted that they're true, and then allowed those truths to shape the way we live? Because that's really what Hebrews chapter 11 wants us to do. And he doesn't want us to do it because we will somehow earn his favor or please him more, but because this is the way that we were designed. This is the manufacturer telling us how to use the product to its best effect. You wouldn't use a lawnmower to cut your child's hair. It would be a disaster. We are being given examples of people who lived lives that matched up to the Creator's intent for us. And you can see that as they lived those lives, it brought in this longer term focus of the promise that helped them to do amazing things like be sawn in two rather than give up the truth of the gospel, being put to death by the sword in order to get a better resurrection. Now we'll get to that. Fiona will get to that next week, but that's where we're heading. I wonder, is it true? Is it possible to really live like this? And if so, we have to get much better at what we were told in Hebrews 10 to do, to meet up together and encourage one another, and do it all the more as we see the end times approaching. So this evening's message is about trusting the trustworthy one, seeing how he builds a fabulous family of faith from fallen, fragile, and faulty people like us. And the challenge is to wonder whether this could be the way we could live. And as we live more like this, might we see more of his kingdom, and might we be greatly encouraged to hear stories of the wonderful ways in which he has rewarded his faith community.